important. EBITDA is important. Execution's important, right? And so I was like, okay, fine, we'll invest in culture. Like I just finally was just like, oh, everyone smart says like I should go do this. So then I go and study culture. And culture, it's like all of this success of culture is that same mental model. It's like 80% of companies don't name their culture. So just naming your culture, big benefit. It's like being a good parent. You don't even have to read parenting books. As long as you buy parenting books, you are already an upper decile parent. Because at least you were thinking about your quality of parenting.
Welcome to the Leadership and Legacy podcast, where we interview inspiring CEOs, entrepreneurs, and software leaders who are building remarkable companies and legacies in the world. I'm your host, Austin Yoder, founder of Magrathea Partners, an entrepreneurial investment firm dedicated to acquiring and growing one great founder-owned software company. As part of my journey, I'm learning from inspiring leaders and builders and gathering the most valuable insights and advice I learn along the way here with you, my wonderful audience, so that we can learn and lead better together. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you'll find as much value and insight in the show as I do. Welcome back, everyone, to the Leadership and Legacy podcast. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Zac Carman. Full disclosure, I am incredibly blessed to have Zac as one of my wonderful investors and supporters. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Zac as an entrepreneur and investor, and we are really fortunate to be able to learn some lessons from him today around operating and leadership. Before we get kicked off, I just want to introduce Consumer Affairs, which is a trusted marketplace that connects consumers and brands through consumer advocacy, news, and reviews. With that, Zac, I would love to take us back a little bit to the point at which you were acquiring Consumer Affairs. You're kind of making this leap from the investing side to the entrepreneurial operator side. What is it that gave you conviction to invest your career into this particular opportunity?
Wow, it's a deep question. When I was searching, I was looking for sort of a set of things. I was looking for a TAM that was really, really big. And what I realized over time was that I was looking for a convergence of trends. And this is like kind of how you come up with an investment thesis. And that's kind of what I learned as an investor, was you try and find some big picture trend and then find the ecosystem of companies that support that trend. And as long as you're not a yokel, you're going to be fine, right? Then there was a set of companies that I had learned about, the ones that we all look up to, Asurion, or there was a company, 5 Hour Energy, that I knew a lot about at one point in time. And I was like, what is it about those companies? Because those companies had just sort of way off the charts success. And in particular, the success I was looking for was a company that was going to be able to bootstrap while growing like a venture-backed business, which is sort of antithetical. There are not many businesses that can do that. And there was another company, ServiceSource, that had done this. And what was it about those businesses that was different? And the thesis that I developed was that they sat at these intersections of trends. And so 5 Hour Energy sort of sat at this intersection of the fattening of the US population and its convergence with screen time. And sort of that drove, and Red Bull enjoyed this as well. It's like the entire energy drink segment grew because of that in a pretty unique way, where it's literally people will drink things that taste like medicine because it's going to give them a shot of energy, right? Because they're I'm just tired because I was on Facebook till 2 a.m. and I'm I'm fat, right? And that just drove just this tremendous financial success. And so that's kind of what I was trying to find with something like that sat at these intersections. And so the thesis with Consumer Affairs was that you had this pretty tumultuous transition of marketing that was occurring, where marketing itself was transforming from an opaque to a transparent format. The way people bought things was changing, marketing was changing, and then also the hyper fragmentation of media was occurring. So there's this nonlinear growth in the channels of information consumers have access to. And that has caused a whole lot of tumult in the world. But, broadly, there are different ways you can handle that. There's curation, which is sort of Facebook and TikTok. And then there is search, which is, or discovery. And within that, there's these elements of consumption that are always going to be search oriented. And so it was a media asset that sort of fit all of that bill. And I discovered it I built a piece of software to basically find that type of media. And it was, very atypical for search at the time, in the sense that the business was comically small and for a traditional search fund. And you really had to squint to sort of see what I was talking about. But maybe it's a vanity. I mean, that's the short answer. Like, I'm amazing. So I was like, oh, I can do this. Like that. I'll sure. Why not just bet my career on this asset? And the founder, I really fell in love with the guy I was going to be working with too. Like his journey and his vision of what he was trying to do was just such a clarity to me of what you needed to do in that media context as well. And Jim wasn't going anywhere. Like Jim was, had built this business, toiled with this business, and put me through the ringer when I was buying it to make sure that I loved it in the same way. And I respect that. And that partnership worked really well. I mean, he stayed on for like 5 or 6 years after the fact, and had multiple bites at the apple that were sequentially bigger. So it was a great outcome for him. And we work every day. We talk about Jim still every day in the business, and we talk about his vector of integrity and his vector of journalism, and that is in the ethos of everything we do. And we try and live up to what he wanted, even today, as the business is a lot bigger and transformed and done different things. So I think it was a combination of vanity and that it fit the bill, and I liked the founder.
Great context and answer. Thank you so much. And for anyone that may not have had the opportunity to spend some time with you in person, which is a tragedy, everybody should be so lucky. I think that they will appreciate your unique sense of humor.
Yeah, we'll see.
And vanity or not, Zach, certainly you are just that amazing. So fantastic. I'd be curious, Zach, is there a challenge that you are most proud of overcoming in your own leadership at Consumer Affairs?
So they're business challenges, but that's like a really interesting question on leadership sides. And I guess it's actually connected to vanity. When you work in private equity and you cold call an operator and you're like, oh God, tell me about your business. And you'll go build a financial model about this business. You're like, here's what, here are the unit economics of this business. And, we did this deal in home health, right? And skilled nursing and hospice and all sort of stuff. And it's like, you model the business and it's like, oh man, these guys just need 50 more nurses, right? It's like, boom, 50 nurses, problem solved, guys, right? Just add 5 salespeople in Excel, problem solved, dude. Like, what are we talking about here? I'll talk to you next quarter. I remember one of my investors was like, thank God Zach's had a child. It's going to really teach him some humility. And I'm like, that is so true, right? Running a business teaches you that humility. And yeah, I mean, we do need to add 50 nurses, and the way we're going to go about doing that is going to take some time, and you're not going to have 100% success rate. And oh, by the way, you then need to get them doing work, right? And so I think I didn't understand company culture. I didn't understand how to motivate people at all. All of the management experience that I had had previously either didn't translate or was erroneous. I think developing into a more human leader is something I'm proud of. The people who worked with me in the early days of the business, think one way of me, and, probably not super nice, because I was just it was more robotic in the way that I thought about how we were building team and how we were doing these things. And over time I've developed into, a more empathetic leader and a more rational, or at least seeing more than just the data leader. I've had these amazing investors as well. Some of them who are also investors of yours. They'll tell you something and you're like, like whatever, like that. They don't know what they're talking about. And it's deceptively simple. And not that I'm into yoga or Eastern stuff, but like, you kind of just have to do it. Just do it. You're not smarter than everyone else. And so you just kind of like accept it. Like, yeah, we are going to invest really deeply in culture and employee experience. Like that's just the right thing to do.
So I hear from you kind of becoming a more human leader, taking some best practices, investing into culture and people. I'd be curious to drill down there a little bit, Zac. Is there a framework that you have found to be helpful for investing in culture? And or is there kind of an illustrative story that shows how you have helped develop culture over time?
I mean, I think initially it was zero and then it became something. There's a mental model that I have. I was on a panel and we were talking about recruiting or no, we were talking about sales orgs. And this guy and I were on a search fund panel and someone was like, what's the best sales training? That's what they asked him. And he quoted some Harvard Business Review study or something. And he's like, that study revealed that there is no difference. There is no statistically meaningful difference between one type of sales training and another. But there's a huge statistical difference between companies that sales train and those that don't. And then it becomes clear. You're like, as soon as you hear that, you're like, oh, got it. It makes sense. It doesn't matter what I pick. I can pick Challenger. We can just like buy some Zig Ziglar tapes or whatever. The mechanism is demonstrating that you're investing in your people, getting a common vernacular between your org. Like these are the mechanisms of sales training success, not one versus the other. Everyone could be like, well, you probably need to think about culture if your employee is, telling your wife at the Christmas party how much she hates you. It's like, you need to think about that a little bit, Zac, right? I'm like, culture, who cares about culture? That's not important. EBITDA is important. Execution's important, right? And so I was like, okay, fine, we'll invest in culture. Like I just finally was just like, everyone smart says I should go do this. So then I go and study culture. And culture, it's like all of this success of culture is that same mental model. It's like 80% of companies don't name their culture. So just naming your culture, big benefit. It's like being a good parent. Like you don't even have to read parenting books. As long as you buy parenting books, you are already an upper decile parent because at least you were thinking about your quality of parenting, and most parents don't do that. So that's step one. And then with the culture, it's like there are so many different cultures that have tremendously successful companies. Like there's a company that I tried to buy. That's like an overstatement. Like they took a call from me and then gracefully said, we're not interested. Here in Tulsa, where I live, that company's been wildly successful. It's like a SaaS business, kind of rule of 90 business for the last 15 years, recapped, multiple times, amazing business. And when I spoke to them, the business was like $800K in revenue. And they're like really religious, And the leadership team kind of preys on decisions. And that really, really works for them. The mechanisms of it are like definitively ejecting non-fits, having a really great filter for fits, and everyone believing the same things, and everyone caring about the same things, and codifying that, and naming that, and celebrating that, and ritualizing that. Cult is the root word. So it's like, that is what you're doing. And when I came to that conclusion, I was like, oh, this is fine. Now I get it. I'm going to pick a data-driven, culture around caring, and a culture around team, and a culture around these things. And we codify it and celebrate it and, agile, iterative type stuff. But yeah, the mechanism is just that. Pick one and then be deliberate.
Hi, it's Austin, your host, with a brief interruption. Since this podcast is free and not supported by ads, I have a very quick ask for you. If you're finding value in this conversation, please consider sharing it with another leader or aspiring leader who you think would enjoy it so that we can learn and lead better together. And if you're a software founder considering a successful exit to a partner who will love your team just as much as you do, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email at austin@magratheapartners.com. That's Austin at Magrathea, Magrathea, magratheapartners.com. Thanks, and now back to the show. Zac, you touched on sales a little bit there, and you mentioned that kind of when you entered into this company and opportunity, it was on the smaller side. I'd be curious, there are many entrepreneurs and leaders who are, going to see this recording an interview who are maybe thinking about similar opportunities and helping to grow and scale a sales force, and grow and scale sales in different companies. What advice would you have for other people who are tackling a similar challenge or opportunity of growing a sales organization within a small growing company?
Well, I have like some success and some not success in doing that. And I think we're working on it now. Again, sales organizations are very different company to company. And the sales team is, you have to sort of think about the types of companies you're selling to. You have to think about who is the functional buyer within the companies you're selling to, and then how much is what you're selling. And those sort of variables will then dictate the type of organization you're going to build. And I think people who are smart call this like a sales motion, maybe, or something like that. Are my salespeople going to live on planes or not? Like, that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, if it's like less than a couple $100,000 a year, like, they're not going to live on planes, most likely. Right. And that's a very different sales organization than, I remember there was a LP of the firm I used to work at who I was talking about a sales, not my sales org, but like a sales org at one of our companies. Like, it takes so long. Like, why is ramp time so long? Like, these salespeople never get productive. And he had been the CEO of a very large medical device business. And he was like, well, our sales guys, it took us 36 months to get them productive because we needed to train them and get them in the OR. Right. And he was just, shut up, kid type thing. But that was like an eye-opening experience to just think about that. The big things that I learned that I think are applicable across all of these is like, deliberateness in your people and your training, deliberateness in process optimization, and then deliberateness in transitioning from a founder-led sales organization to a non-founder-led sales organization. We're still trying to figure out how to do that well. And I think that building stamp and repeat is a skill set in and of itself. And I think our guys have figured that out now. And how do you navigate that? I think searchers are going to have to navigate that a lot because, you're probably buying something where that needs to happen. And that's a big task to sort of take that je ne sais quoi of the founder and the relationship they have with those key sales folks that they've taken, hopefully made super rich. How do you replicate that? That's non-trivial. I think that's another key thing to think about.
Excellent food for thought across the board there. So Zac, one of the unique things about your leadership experience at Consumer Affairs is you've built a remote organization, or at least an organization where there's kind of a hybrid and remote component. And you really have, scaled over time. I would be curious for any insights or advice that you would have for others who are thinking about investing in culture and, creating a successful remote organization.
I mean, that is real hard, is the answer. We've studied it a lot and thought about it a lot. There's this professor at Harvard Business School that has studied this a lot, like who's really nailing it. And then it's like, these engineering companies, like GitHub's really nail remote culture. It's like, or they, are hiring all engineers. It's like, they're all engineers. And that team wants to interact through Confluence and Jira, right? It's like, is it in the ticket? Sorry. So it's like kind of natural for those companies to be remote. I would not say that I have any silver bullets of doing that well. I think it just is plain old fashioned getting together. So you see these companies, like companies that are hybrid remote, getting together. I think something we're playing with now is actually a lot more space. Pre-COVID, we had a couple spaces in remotes. Now we have, we'll probably like 4 or 5 reasons to go places. And then once you're there, not like we're weirdly getting together at the Courtyard Marriott. Instead, like we have our own kind of vibe of a space or whatever. Maybe a little nicer than Courtyards, but still, Courtyards. Not some weird conference room, right? It's like our conference room. So that's something we're playing with, is sort of the remote offices and density so that you can create more hybrid work, not more remote work. We are now fully hybrid in the places that we do have these offices, not fully in office. So pre-COVID, we had offices where we were fully in office and then a bunch of remote. And post-COVID, like we're more, I think it loosened the reins on the full in office because it's like, oh, well, we don't really need to be here 5 days a week. It's really the sweet spot seems to be three, couple days a week. Like I just need to like get on Excel and grind, right? Or whatever role I'm doing versus, being proximate with folks. Being really successful in remote takes the manufacturing line approach as well. I think that's the other key insight in remote work in general is creating leverage through asynchronous work and fragmentation of work and the micro measurement of work. So in distributed teams, a lot of that works, but then that dehumanizes people culturally, right? Because it's like not really like the more you extract roles into fungible tokens, it removes a lot of the need for the relationship building.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is, remote and hybrid certainly comes with its own challenges, just as any style of work does. And what you and consumer affairs are focused on is sort of bringing people together in your own unique spaces that are aligned with your culture, even if they are remote or hybrid, the opportunity to bring people together, convene in person, and have that personal touch and connection remains really important. And then every organization is always working on, the right style for everybody to work together. And it sounds like what you're saying is taking a very data-driven approach to what's the right number of days in the office, out of the office, where are we? It sounds like that's very aligned with the data-driven culture you mentioned.
And I knew there was a reason I invested, Austin, and that is because you said it so much better than I did.
Not at all.
That's a good, that's, just take what I said or what you said and put it back in my mouth. And that's what I should have said. But yes.
I'm sure we can do that with AI one of these days soon, Zach.
Next week.
Right. Fantastic. So really helpful. And, I want to be respectful of your time. So I'll restrict myself to sort of two more questions. One is just any advice that you would have for other people who are just starting off in their own leadership journeys?
Yeah, I mean, I think reread Dale Carnegie, right? Hopefully you've already read it. If you haven't read it, like there's a reason Warren Buffett only hung that on his wall, right? Or only hangs that on his wall because his graduations, it's like some fabled story. It's probably not even true, but who knows? I've never been in his office, but there's only one thing hanging on his office wall, and that's his graduation from Dale Carnegie's training. Just some of the plain old fashioned type of stuff. And I think, there are these adages of like, oh, like don't change anything. Like when you buy a company, really understanding the people and what they're doing more and understanding those roles. Like something I wish we had done sooner and maybe more as a business is maybe we should do more of that actually, where it's like you role switch, like shadowing. We used to do shadowing a lot and it's less since COVID because it's harder, I think, to do that shadowing, but sort of understanding, developing the empathy for the role, right? Like that's what the mechanism of shadowing is. That it's like ask an engineer to like deal with some customers and like see the change in that engineer. And so you should do that yourself, right? Like when you jump into these roles as a searcher, I think that's like what I would spend most of my time doing initially is sort of developing that understanding and empathy of the roles and the things that you're actually asking these people to do. I always think of that I forget his name, but he had a show, Dirty Jobs. That guy's like the master of the empathy, right? Like it's like gonna shovel shit.
He's got like the mud all over his face. That level of empathy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always hilarious. Like just watch some of that show. Like watch some of that show before you buy it to sort of like grok what is about to happen to you. This is what we do every day. And so I think like doing those roles would make you better.
So reading some of the classics and, they're classics for a reason, and then really taking the time to develop empathy for all of the people that you're working with and all of the roles that they're doing, just to understand. Maybe being a leader and developing as a leader starts with understanding.
Perfect.
So, Zach, last question for you. The title of the podcast is the Leadership and Legacy Podcast. And I would be very curious to understand, what does legacy mean to you? What does legacy look like for you? You've been on this entrepreneurial journey for some time now. How do you think about your personal legacy in the world?
This is a big question as well. I think that, so I didn't know what to call it. When I was a cold call associate and calling lots of different bootstrapped, growing, profitable businesses, when I was there, we were focused on purely MOIC and IRR. So it's like find great opportunities, invest in those great opportunities. And there's like some limitations on like what we would invest in. Like we're not going to invest in like I was really all in on, I was like, man, I really want to invest in sort of the legalization of marijuana as a trend. And like, we were just like, no, we're not doing that. Right. But pretty much there was no limitation. And so it was really more around, making money. And there were just like, and through that, there were just like types of businesses that I did not like. And what I realized I did not like about them was that profitability was not correlated with outcome. And this is now called the tension between shareholder capitalism and stakeholder capitalism. There's like a whole wealth of resources to read about that. And so when I was searching for a business, I was very intentional about finding a business where I believed profitability was strongly correlated to outcomes of the constituents of the business. So like I didn't want to create a business or be involved or bet my career on or wake up every single day and go home and kiss my kids at night doing something where profitability was a choice of an outcome for our client, right? And so our business, like in its essence, we think about we're teachers and we teach people how to buy these really expensive things that are sort of a car wreck of consumption connected to a life event. And the better job we do teaching those people, the better customer they are for the supply side of our marketplace. And the better customer they are, the more the supply side is willing to invest to get those customers. And oh, by the way, we don't just help them buy one thing, we help them buy many things. And so the better job we do teaching them on that transaction and then them having a great experience and being a good customer means the deeper the trust relationship we have with them is. And so we're able to develop a long-term relationship with that consumer and help them in time because life itself is time-oriented. And so therefore we create the biggest lifetime value. And so in a really great marketplace, especially a teaching enabled marketplace that's content driven and data driven, because we use our data pipelines to sort of provision the knowledge that we have internally to help people make those decisions and get connected. So the connection is sort of like a quantitative hedge fund, actually. But like that is good in its essence. And so if I die tomorrow, like I do not feel bad that I've spent the last 14 years trying to build something that is aligned. So there is no tension with our shareholders and our investors and myself as an investor and my fiduciary obligations to grow enterprise value, because that which itself is a function of profitability and time, because optimizing profitability is squarely correlated to the outcomes of our constituents. And I think that alignment of stakeholders is what I would be optimizing for if I were searching for a new business, or that's what I didn't know to call it stakeholder capitalism really. And there are other stakeholders like the environment and your vendors and your employees. Like these are other stakeholders. And it's like you want to, as much as possible, align all of their interests in time. And that's also why I take a deeper, a longer term vision of the company. This is what I spend most of my time doing. So this is the legacy. That's like the other call option I have on a continued legacy. And I spend a lot of time on that. And then I think the philanthropy that I do is around Tulsa. I'm fifth generation Tulsa. So I spend a lot of time on Tulsa, and I spend a lot of time on, it's like, it takes more capital than I can deploy in philanthropy right now. But I think the biggest problem for Indigenous youth is seeing, I was like very fortunate. Like my family were all like blue collar up until my parents. And then my parents are both artists, and artists get kind of invited to the party. Even though I grew up kind of in a rural steel mill town in rural Oklahoma outside of Tulsa, I was able to see sort of like what can be, and that access to opportunity and just like knowing what can exist is a limiter for a lot of kids. And so it's something we're actually investing in Tulsa as a company, is sort of digital literacy and AI literacy in K-12. Now we're doing it in the name of workforce development because I want K-12 kids that go to college, and we invest in a college here as well, like that understand AI prompt engineering and understand the trajectory of LLMs and all of these things. Like that's workforce development that I need around my business. But it's like, so that would be another big vector. I think that's a legacy I'm interested in, is Indigenous youth, and sort of and sort of investing in programs across tribe, not only my tribe, but other tribes as well, that sort of can show access and show like, this is what being a lawyer really is. Or if you go to the reservation, like those kids are not seeing what Goldman Sachs is, right? And just like what exists. And so what are programs that we could build to help Indigenous youth have that access is something I'm interested in. But that's like a bigger time allocation and capital allocation than I have right now. But that's like another thing that's kind of on the back burner from a legacy perspective, and sort of just lifting up the Indigenous population is something is near and dear to my heart.
That's great and really helpful. Another topic that I would love to chat with you about another time is just, I know that you're also kind of an avid appreciator of art, and that you have actually great taste in art. So that's a conversation for another day.
My background does not show it, but yeah, I've been intending to like actually make this background better. But and there's a piece of art that I've like been trying to get for it. But another time, Austin.
Thank you. I think that is the perfect place to end our conversation and interview today. I couldn't be more grateful to you for your time and for the insights that we can now share with our audience. So thank you so much, Zac. This was a lot of fun.